Welcome to our monthly member series. Today's talk is by Bob Schriger, titled How I Got to Tie Points Selling Drugs. He didn't know he was a former drug dealer. I've got to call my son. He was a former narcotics agent.
I gotta leave.
As you expect, Bob was a pharmacist from the New York City area. Bob graduated from Fordham College of Pharmacy in 1957. Here's some tidbits covering Bob's life. Bob and his lovely wife, Judy, have been married 68 years. They met at Judy's Sweet 16 party. They have 3 children who live in Berkeley, California, Big Sky, Montana, and Jerusalem, Israel. After a career operating 2 pharmacies, Bob and Judy retired in Hilton Head in 1994 and has been at Tie Point for 7 years, calling bingo for the past 5 years. Bob is a proficient clarinet player since 1948. He was a member of the Hudson Valley Wind Symphony, Hilton Head Orchestra, and Low Country Wind Symphony. He was even a dance instructor at Fred Astaire's dance studio for 10 years. Let's hear more about his life and career by joining me in welcoming our friend and neighbor, Bingo Bob Schriger.
Thanks for coming. After being married 68 years, I did make one mistake. I didn't ask for a large enough dowry. Lee mentioned we have 3 children, and I'll give you a couple stories about Todd, who lives in California. He's just 62. My daughter, Suzanne, who lives in Big Sky, is 66. And my oldest son, Alan, and his Hebrew name is Avraham, he's 67. And they've given us, Alan has given us 6 grandchildren. No, 6, yes, 6, they're grandchildren for us. And we're looking forward for great-grandchildren. We have 5 great-grandchildren now. And because he's modern Orthodox, they get married early, so we expect in 5 years we'll be great-great-grandparents, which will be something. But let's talk about Todd. When Todd went to school, and he went to school in Lake Forest, Illinois, just north of Chicago, I got him a car, and I said, good luck. Well, that night, I got a phone call from Todd. He was staying at a hotel in Cleveland. And as he pulled into the hotel, there were 2 fellas there. And as he got out of the car, they said to him, aren't you from New York? Of course, they saw the license plate, and they were waiting for somebody. And they said, would you like to come to a party tonight that we're having? And he said, yeah, sure. Well, he woke up the next morning in his room. There was no money in his wallet. There was no car. And this is how he started out, that he got on the phone call, called me in the store, and I was on the plane, and I was out in Cleveland within 3 hours. And we went to Lake Forest, and that's his start. And then a couple of weeks later, I called him in his dorm room, and his roommate answered the phone, and I said, is Todd there? And he said, no, Todd's not here. He went to see Bruce Springsteen. And I said, being so naive, I said, well, give me Bruce's room, and I'll call you. Suzanne, the same thing. When she went to school at Bentley in Boston, I gave her a car also. And I said, being a female, it's very important that you go to the same filling station every week and get your gas and introduce yourself to the owner so they won't try and rip you off. And I called her a couple of weeks later and I said, did you take my advice? She said, Dad, I took your advice just like you said. I met the owner and I'm very happy with him and I got everything that you told me to do, and beside it, I get gasoline free. And I said, how do you get gasoline free? Well, she said the owner's son happened to be in the office at the time, and he asked me out on the date, and we've gone a couple last week and a couple times this week, she said, and now he's a nice guy. The bottom line, they've been married 37 years. Alan Abraham, which he prefers to be called now, he went to school in Pennsylvania, and he studied at Bucknell, the University of Tennessee. He went, and after that, then he went to study at Yeshiva University in New York. And one of the requirements at Yeshiva is you have to spend 6 months in Israel, learning about Israel, learning the language. And I remember taking him to Kennedy Airport in New York. And just before he went through the gate where passengers only go through and I couldn't go anymore, I said, remember, you're married to your studies. So don't call me up and say you're getting married. And he said, okay, Dad, okay, Dad. Well, that phone call came a couple of months later. He met this young lady, and she was an American. She went to school at Brandeis, and she was a Zionist, and she had moved permanently to Israel. And being Orthodox, you don't realize that you're not allowed to be alone. You always have to have a chaperone with you. And generally, what you do, you meet in a hotel lobby with the chaperone and with the respective date and see if you have anything in common. And it's by the second meeting, you're generally, that's the engagement already. Because they have so much in common with religion, and the divorce rate for the Orthodox in Israel is less than 1% because of this being so much that you have in common. And he said, I'd like to get married. And I said, what? He said, can you come over right away? He said, because we can't even hold hands. And I said, well, there's a flu epidemic going on. I said, I'm short a couple of pharmacists. He said, well, when can you come? Can you come next week? This was January, and I said, I can come with Mom in June. He said, in June? Well, he waited. And on June 10th, which was our anniversary, they got married. And we made about 12 trips to Israel. He said, it's at the point now, he said, I don't want you on an airplane for 12 hours. It's a 12-hour nonstop flight. He said, we'll come to see you. And that's the way we've been working it out. Now let's start with Fordham College of Pharmacy, which I graduated in 1957. The first day, we met the dean in a lecture hall, and the first thing he said to us, there are 200 students in this room now. He said, I want to let you know that when you get to the third year, the junior year, we only have room for 100 students. So look around, because half of you won't be here. And out of the 200 students, there were 197 men and 3 women. And 3 women were all nuns. And the nuns had gone to pharmacy school to work in Catholic hospitals. And the problem with the nuns, after we worked, we went to the pharmacies to serve our apprenticeship and to learn. The nuns went back to the convent and all they did is study. So when it came to a test, the highest the guys got was like a 60. It would have been great on a curve, except the problem was the nuns were coming with 97 and 99. So what could we do? And when you went for a job as an apprentice, the first thing the pharmacist would ask you, are you here for experience or are you here for money? And if you said money, you didn't get the job. And my first job, I remember, and I did it for a year, is when women in the 50s and the 60s would buy sanitary products. They didn't like carrying those big boxes of Kotex and Modus around. So my job was to wrap them in green paper, and I got to make very nice corners and everything. And I would mark it like KS, which meant Kotex Super, Modus R, Modus Regular, and then the women, you know, could walk around, they didn't have to worry, you know, people are looking, you know, to buy a product. Those were the 50s and 60s. That's the way it was. The second job was even better, and that was in Times Square, one of the drugstores there. And Times Square was known as a red light district. And my first job at that store was anybody who came into the store with an umbrella and it was a sunny day out, my job was to follow them around in the store. Because what they would do is they would take the merchandise and throw it into the umbrella and then, you know, walk out. So my job was to wait till I walked out and then I'd say to them, by the way, you know, I think there's a threat of rain, and I would take the umbrella and open it and all the merchandise would fall out. And they took off. We had a wonderful collection of umbrellas. Then I got a promotion, and I was promoted to the cosmetic department. And my job was to take care of the cosmetics, the perfumes, like Chanel, Arpege, My Sin, pardon the pun, you know. And we had an arrangement with the hookers who were working Times Square, and they would come in with the John, and you know, the hooker would say, "Oh, look at that bottle of Arpege on the shelf. I'd love for you to buy that for me." And the John, you know, knew what was going to come up afterwards. "Oh, sure." He said, "How much is it?" $50. So took it off the shelf, gave it to her. They were gone an hour. After the hour, she would come back, you know, and I would rewrap the package, and we would give her $20, and we kept $30. And we had one hooker who was so good, she came back 10 times in one night. And she made $200, we made $300. I was really learning as an apprentice, you know, what pharmacy is all about. Well, when you graduate pharmacy school, you are a graduate pharmacist, but you're not a licensed pharmacist. So everybody wanted to, you know, waiting for the state exams to start. So we took off for Augusta, Georgia, a few of us in the car, and we took the exam. And 3 days later, we had a license. And I've never been back to Maine since. You know, and we were now licensed registered pharmacists. And I said, you know, when we retire, when we're 60 years old, we're going to have to take these pharmacy tests. I said, we're going to have a lot of empirical knowledge, but I'm not going to remember my organic chemistry, my pharmacology, my pharmacognosy. I think, so maybe what we should do is we should go now to these states we want. My partner went to Florida because he said, that's where my retirement is going to be. And I said, well, let me try Georgia first. And I was told when you go to Georgia and you appear before the State Board of Pharmacy, the first thing they're gonna ask you, would you like to practice in Atlanta? And you gotta say no, because there were plenty of pharmacists in Atlanta. So you say something like, I'd like to practice in Albany. In New York, we call that Albany. Or you say Ludowici. And Ludowici is about 40 miles south of Savannah, just after Fort Stewart. And sure enough, a week later, had my license in Georgia. Next state to come up was South Carolina. And that was a hard one. They sent me a 1,000-page book on pharmacognosy, the most boring subject. And pharmacognosy is the study of drugs derived from plant origin. I'll give you an example, like the most popular one was digitalis, digoxin, and that was used to slow the beat and increase the force of the beat. And it was a very popular drug. And another one would be belladonna. And belladonna was an antispasmodic used for people with gastric problems. But belladonna was used by the early Egyptians because when the women would put it in the eye as a drop, it would dilate the pupil, and that was considered a sign of beauty. So I studied this 1,000-page book, and I got down to Columbia to take the test, and I saw other young people who had graduated pharmacy school, and they were taking an exam, but they had a book with 12 pages in it. And I said, what exam are you taking? They said, the same one you do. I said, but I got a 1,000-page book, and you got 12. They said, well, the test, this is the summary in the 12 pages, and this is where the exam comes from. So what happened, I got into the room, and usually I'm one of the first out. Well, I was the last one out. That first garbage pail I found, I threw that 1,000-page book, went downstairs, got into a cab, get me out of South Carolina. Somehow, I passed because the license came, you know, so I was licensed now in all these states, and that was nice. My first job was at Flushing, Queens, which is right near where the tennis tournament was just. And I learned a lot there, and I learned to say yes to the customers. I was taught, always try and say yes, always try and please the customer, and that's what you have to do. And it worked. And I want to tell you a couple of stories. One I call the ultimate sacrifice. And in the 50s and 60s, the ultimate sacrifice was performed by rabbits, because people would come in for pregnancy tests. It's not like today, you go for a pregnancy test and pick it up. 5 minutes later, you got the results and you know. In those days, it took a week, you know, to find out the results. And what we did is we would mail the specimen to a laboratory in Chicago, and they would notify us. And they notified us by calling the store. And to save time, what they did, if the test, they would try and call person to person. And if they asked for Mrs. Smith, that meant the test was positive. If they asked for Mrs. Jones, that meant the test is negative. You know? And it saved time, but we never accepted any of the calls. And over a couple of years, there were a couple of hundred tests. All of a sudden, one day, we had an inspector from the telephone company come in, and he had a list. He says, what's going on here? He said, I see 250 yeses, you know, for Mrs. Smith, and 127 negatives for Mrs. Jones, and no, you didn't accept any of the calls. And my boss at the time said, I don't know what's happening, but I can assure you it will never happen again. And luckily, we were very lucky that time. The doctors in the area would always get lots of samples, and they would fill the back room with all these samples. And every once in a while they'd call the drugstore and they'd say, can you send your man over? He says, I need the room, I got all these samples, just pick them up and do what you want with them. And we sent them over, and what we did is we put them separate from the regular merchandise, and if someone is an indigent person, they couldn't afford their medicine, we would give that medicine to them. But somehow, what happened, one of the packages, and it was an antibiotic, didn't get into the indigent file, it got into the regular merchandise. And I think it was me, and I dispensed it. And on the capsule, it said the word sample. And the patient called up and said, I got the antibiotic, but it says sample on it. And I said, I thought fast and I said, yes. He said, this is a very powerful medication. Under no circumstances are you to sell it to anybody or give it to anybody. You make sure you finish the pills. Well, somehow she bought it, and I was pretty lucky with that one. And unfortunately, there were a lot of robberies in those days, and there were, I think that one year, 45 pharmacists had been killed in the store. And I remember one situation when I was working one night, and two guys came in with 45s, and they put it to my head, and they said, we want your money, we want your drugs. I said, take what you want. He said, first of all, it's not my store, I'm just working here. And one of them said, I don't like your face, I'm gonna blow your brains out. And the other one said, well, leave him alone, he's okay, he's giving us the merchandise. Well, they left. Luckily, they didn't kill me. About a year later, in Flushing, which was an adjoining town, two detectives one went up the escalator, the second one went through the front door, and they got this guy in the bedroom. And the first thing he said to the guys, don't shoot, and he grabbed a 1-year-old baby. As soon as the detectives put the guns down, he shot both detectives. So then I realized this guy was really going to blow my brains out. He was crazy. So it came about 6 months later to the trial, and the week before the trial, his mother, one of the gunmen, came to the store and she said, my boy is a good boy. He wouldn't do this. And I said, anybody who takes a gun and puts it to my head and threatens to blow my brains out, I said, I'm going to remember. I said, the problem with your son, they have robbed so many stores, they don't even remember what they did. Well, when it came to the trial, he got a 40-year sentence, which was a long sentence, but he deserved it. But, you know, those situations you don't like to happen. Well, after about seven years of working and learning a lot, I decided it's time to buy your own business. And generally when you graduated pharmacy school, you had a choice. You can go into hospital pharmacy, retail pharmacy, research, or you can be a detail man and detail doctors about new drugs coming out. But majority, the ambition was to own your drugstore one day. Not like today, because not unions, but insurance companies have told, like my particular store is, you're not in our network anymore because we only have to have one store in each town. It's better for bookkeeping for us. Well, it was better, and the final nail in the coffin for us with a drugstore is I wanted to fill a prescription for myself, and it was denied. They said, you can't fill it, you have to go to CVS to fill the prescription. So I said, that's it. I said, we got to get out of this business. But so when we were looking for pharmacies, we looked in Binghamton, New York, because I wanted to get away from New York. We went to Buffalo, we went to Rochester, the Mohawk Valley, Albany. We didn't call it Albany, we called it Albany. We went up to Lake George, and we couldn't find anything. And I had called a classmate of mine from upstate, and he said, I'd like to look also, and maybe we can have a partnership. Well, we finally found a store in New Rochelle, which is a suburb of New York City. And we bought this store, and it turned out the first day that we worked together, we said, we have made the biggest mistake of our life. The reason being that I was a type A and very compulsive, and my partner was the biggest procrastinator in the world, which meant we couldn't work together. So we decided that he'll work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll work Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. But we'll call each other on our days off, and keep in touch. It took me 10 years to figure out that he's off Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and the store was closed on Sunday, so he's off every weekend. 10 years it took me to figure that out. So I said to him, the next 10 years we're going to reverse it. He said, no, we'll have 1 week on, Tuesday, Thursday, the next week off, and we'll do it like that. So it was my first Saturday off in 10 years, and the biggest disappointment of my life. I'm used to going on the roads where there was a lot of traffic. It turned out there was very little. It's the opposite way. There turned out to be a lot of traffic on Saturdays, and I'm used to no traffic. Going into a store, a department store, we were used to going into a store where there were more employees than customers to wait on. And this was, so I called him up and said, can we go back to the old schedule? He says, no, we're gonna keep it like this. And it was the relationship, it was never a social relationship, but we managed to last 32 years. And I tried to help him out because I had been working in the drugstore since I was 10 years old, and I served an apprenticeship. And he didn't do any of that. So what I tried to do, I said, I'll try and help you as much as I can. Then after about 10 years, I said, you've learned an awful lot. He said, well, you've been telling me an awful lot for 10 years, but now I'm going to tell you, everything you told me went in this ear and out this ear. It was like a waste, but I just was trying to do it for the business sake. And we had, so it was a conflict. It was like trying to make an emulsion. And with an emulsion, what you have to do is you take oil and you take water and you mix them together. And it's very hard to do, but with the use of certain gums like Tragican, you can mix it. But socially, we were not. And one episode, his wife came in the store after a number of years and said, our daughter is getting married and we're having a small affair, and it's small, so we can only have a few people, but there are certain people that you have to invite. I said, you're talking about me, right? She says, well, yeah. And I thought fast, and I said, it's the same situation where you get an invitation to a wedding, a bar mitzvah, an event, and you really don't want to go, but you feel an obligation because you were asked, and you say yes, but you wish you could say no. So she got the hint that we were not very, very happy. But the store worked out well, and we had a number of important people. Does anybody recognize, if I mention a famous artist, and his initials are NR? Anybody know? Norman Rockwell. He was a customer of ours also. Then we had many UN delegates, because the UN headquarters was in New York, and New Rochelle, just being in Westchester County, adjacent to New York, they had a lot of homes there, and they lived there. And Teresa Brewer, and Paul Stuckey. And Paul Stuckey was from Peter, Paul, and Mary. He was a customer. And do you remember Joan London on Good Morning America? She was a customer. So we had quite a few people. and there were quite a few large mansions, you know, in the area. So it was a pretty affluent area. Well, we had some problems in the store because across the street from the store was a high school, and it looked like a medieval castle. And it's still today the same thing. And there was a lake in front of it. Unfortunately, there were rodents by the lake. But when it came to October, they didn't want to spend the winters outdoors, so our store was on the ground floor, and there was an apartment building above us with 6 stories. And the rodents would go into our basement. And in the nights, when the store was closed, they'd come up into the store and they make a beeline for the 5-cent candy bars. But we learned, well, you know, it's a cost of doing business. But then all of a sudden, the rodents, you know, their taste got a little better, and they were going into the pound Whitman samplers and the pound Russell Stover, and we said, we got to do something about this. So I thought the brilliant idea, we're going to buy a big supply of the laxative X-Lax, chocolate X-Lax, and we bought hundreds and hundreds. We put it down the cellar, and the active ingredient in there was a poison in a large dose. And, you know, the mice and the rodents, they didn't know what the dose was, and just kept eating and eating and eating. And it solved the problem, but it was messy. So I said, why don't we find a mouser? Why don't we go down to the Humane Society and find ourselves a mouser? And we got the cat, and we put the cat in the basement for 2 days. We never saw another rodent. And I said to my partner, this cat is so good, I'm going to let him work 2 days a year, and 363 days a year, he's going to live in my house, and he's going to live on boar's head roast beef, and he's going to be happy, happy, happy. Well, it's the cat lasted for 10 years, and we had a large business of delivery, and we always said yes. And we had customers who would call up, believe it or not, for an ice cream soda, and we would send it to them. The problem is the ice cream soda, we got 35 cents, and we were paying the driver 75 cents to deliver it. But it was creating goodwill, and that was you wanted to build your business, so that was one of the course of it. And finally, after a while, we had people, well, there were so many deliveries that we had said, we got to go and get a car. And we bought a car, and it didn't work out well. So we contacted one of the car agencies who was renting cars, and they would rent us the car for the month. We would hire a driver, and we would give him 10 deliveries. He'd go out, and we hired one fella, and I said, here's 10 deliveries, and here's a map. It should take you about a half hour, and you should be back. Well, he came back in 10 minutes. And I said, wow, we got a winner this time. But what happened is he came back and he said, I went in the car and I went to start it, and I noticed that there's 3 pedals on the floor. He said, what's that 3rd pedal for? It's the clutch, you know. So I said, well, that's to rest your foot, your left foot, if it gets tired. He said, oh. I said, but I don't think you're right for this job, because I don't want to burn out a clutch. Then we hired another fella, and we were renting the cars, and we had to bring the car into the rental to be serviced. And the fella said, I still need a car. And he said, well, I don't have it. He said, what I'll do is I'll give you a brand new car, but just tell your driver to be careful. It's a brand new car. Sure enough, he totals the car. So I had a call. And he was very nice, the owner. He said, look, we're insured for this. He said, we'll get reimbursed. I said, but I still need a car. Your car isn't ready yet. He said, I'm giving you another brand new car, please. he totaled that car on the same day. That was one of the most difficult phone calls I ever had to make, calling after that second car was totaled. I felt so bad. Sometimes we would have a delivery. We delivered till 6 o'clock, but the store was open to 9 o'clock at night, and some people would call up and they'd say, "Can I have a delivery?" I said, "Well, the driver's gone home, but I'd be glad to drop it off to you on the way home." And we had one family, the Kane family, and they, two brothers, each lived in a mansion. They had like 50 rooms each, and they were spending like $1,000 a month each on drugs, cosmetics, and everything, sundries that we had in the store. So I said, "Sure, I'll be happy to go and drop it off to you." And on the way home, and Mrs. Kane greets me at the door wearing an evening gown. And she says, "Oh, Bob, so thanks for delivering this." She said, "We just put a new dance floor downstairs, and it's like a ballroom." He says, "I want you to just come to take a look." And I was anxious to see, so I went downstairs, and as soon as I get downstairs, all of a sudden, tango music starts. And Mrs. Kane says, "Can we do one dance?" She said, "I'd love, Bob, for you to twirl me around the room." And I did it, and just as we're about finished with the tango, who comes in but Mr. Kane? And I'll never forget his words. He said, "Bob, when you finish the dance, will you please leave?" I never got out of a place so fast. I didn't want to lose these customers.
Let's see what else was.
Another customer called at night, and again I said, "I'll drop it off there on the way home." And I dropped it off, and she comes to the door, and she's got tears in her eyes. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Do I have to take the medicine?" I said, "Well, if you don't want it, I'll take it back." She said, "My husband just died 10 minutes ago." I said, I'm awfully sorry." I said, "I'll take the medicine, just forget it." She said, "But you can do me one favor." I said, "Sure, what can I do for you?" And she said, and she bought a big bag of garbage. And she said, "On the way home, could you find a garbage pail somewhere and dump this, Here, so I said to her, "Well, it's a lesson in humility, So I learned from that situation. Now we have one other customer, and I can use their names because this is many years, they're all deceased by now. And her name was Mrs. Stern. And Mrs. Stern was very big in the stock market. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have the means of getting prices. So they had one newspaper, the New York Post, and they had several editions a day, but they had the closing prices in the last edition. And she said, "Can you send me the newspaper? I'd be grateful." And there I'm paying 75 cents to deliver a 10-cent newspaper. But she was pretty smart. She lived in a 50-room mansion all by herself, and she said, "What I'd like to do is continue to get the newspaper, but I feel badly, because I know it's costing you money." She said, "Why don't you, every time you send me the newspaper," and this was Monday to Friday, she said, "send me 10 rolls of toilet paper." And we did that, for like 3 years. And it was 10, and so it came out to 50 rolls of toilet paper every week she got, which meant 200 rolls she was getting a month, and it came out to 2,500 rolls she was getting for the year. And I always never got to see, but I always wondered what she did. And she had all these bedrooms, and I'm sure every one of them, was just filled up with toilet paper. One person can't use 500 rolls of toilet paper. Then we used to have customers who would come in and they would get a cinder in their eye. And I got to be very good at removing cinders. I would flip the lid, I'd clean the eyelid, and they became customers for life. And they would go tell everybody about that great pharmacist, what he can do. So today, with the laws the way they are, you're not cleaning anybody's eyelids anymore because you're going to hear from a lawyer. So you gotta be very careful. Now, we had one situation where people leave it already. Where this man, I was working the front register, we were open Sundays, and he came and he would buy the Times and the News, and he put $1 down on the counter. And all of a sudden, I noticed that he turned ashen gray. I was able to run from the back of the cash register to the front and grab him just as he was falling, so his head did not hit the terrazzo floor. And I lied him down supine on his back. I ran to the back of the store. I got a couple of nitroglycerins. I stuck it under his tongue. I called 911, and I wondered if he survived or not. Didn't hear from him. 5 or 6 weeks later, he comes in to the store, and he looked great. And I said, "How are you, Mr. Jones?" He said, "I'm fine." He says, "But I think I have one problem." I said, "What's that?" He said, "When I was in 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think I put $1 on the counter, but I didn't get my paper, so could I take today's paper of no charge?" I saved the guy's life. All he was worrying about is the dollar bill. That's the way it went. Anyway, Judy and I we went to a number of affairs, bar mitzvahs, weddings, and I didn't like to dance. I didn't like it because I wasn't good at it, like a lot of husbands. So I said, I gotta learn how to dance. So I told her that my partner and myself, at night, for 3 or 4 weeks, a pharmaceutical company is sponsoring a new drug, and we're invited to come and to learn about all the side effects and everything about the drug, so we can present it. And she bought it. And every night I was at the dance studio taking a lesson. And after about 3 weeks, my partner called my house and he said, "Let me speak to Bob." And Judy said, "Oh, aren't you with Bob at the lecture?" He said, "What lecture?" Well, I got home that night and my wife was not a very happy person. But when I told her the truth, then, she calmed down. So it sounds glamorous, to being a dance instructor, and after about 3 or 4 years of taking lessons, and then she took lessons, I didn't teach, I had one of the other male instructors teach her. They said to me, "You've done pretty well here. We need another dance teacher." I said, "Would you be willing to work?" And I said, "Well, in the pharmacy during the day, it's probably a good idea to do this." I said, because the average prescription was $3 to $5. That was a prescription. The dance lessons, we were charging $75 an hour. And the people this was in the 50s and 60s, and the people were paying that, and they're happy. When they came to pick up, nobody was happy when they had to pay $3 to $5 for a prescription. So it's better to be in the dance business than, so the first 5 years that I was there, I was low man on the totem pole. And it sounded glamorous, teaching, but I had to wear a suit, wear a tie, and I never had a woman student who weighed less than 350 pounds. I didn't get seniority, I'm still a low man on the totem pole. And if you think it's fun and easy to push, a 350-pound woman, around for 3 to 4 hours a night, it doesn't work out like that. But after 5 years, then all of a sudden, I'm getting the women who are under 200 pounds, and I'm happy like a lark. And what we used to do, we would have dance competitions where all the Fred Astaire studios on the East Coast would meet at some hotel, and one of my students, she was entered, and we had 50 couples on the floor, and this was a bossa nova contest. And we danced, and we came in second. And I said to her, congratulations, out of 50 couples, to come in second is very good. You know what her answer was? There is no substitute for number one. You know, some people you can never satisfy. Let's see. And when we had customers, we had one, and she was an OBGYN doctor, and she lived in Bronxville. I think we have a couple of people here who come from Bronxville. And she took lessons, and $75 a lesson, and she took 10 lessons a week. So she was paying $750 a week, and she was paying $3,000 a month. Well, she got to be a very good dancer. You know? And I said to her once, I said, why are you spending all this money here? And she said, I'll tell you the truth. She said, I'd rather give it to you guys than give it to a psychiatrist. And it worked out well. She said, but I have one request. She said, I would like you to teach my husband because he wants to learn to dance. And he also was an OBGYN doctor. Well, he was the most difficult pupil we ever had. Every pupil that we had made some sort of progress. Some were better than others, but everybody was happy. But with him, he had like 3 left feet. So I thought of the idea, how am I going to teach this guy? So what I did is, I said, let me make 200 templates of each foot, his left foot and right foot. And what I did is, on the dance floor, I pasted them down to the floor with Scotch tape, and his job was just to go from one template to the other one, and in a counterclockwise position, because that's how you dance in competitions, you know, so nobody banged into each other. And it took quite a while, and after a couple of months, I was able to take those templates away, but he had in his mind where they were, and he was able to get around the floor. And it worked out pretty well. Then I had another woman pupil, and she had a deformed left hand. And when you're in a dance position, you're like this, and your right hand is around her waist. And she couldn't also hear. She had a hearing problem. And the whole beauty of dancing is to go with the rhythm, feel the rhythm, and you know, and continue in doing that. But she couldn't hear it. So what I did with her, I would tap out the rhythm with my finger on her, around her waist, and she was able to hear the rhythm from my fingers, and she was able to dance.
Well, there was always a way to solve, you know, problems.
Let's see what else we got here. Oh, once I was giving a tango exhibition at one of these parties, and I was in tango position, smiling, and I got through, and this man came up to me, and he said, I think I know you. I said, well, I don't recognize you. He said, my name is Dr. Resnick. He said, I'm an orthodontist. He said, when you were dancing, I recognized those teeth. That was my work. And I said, he told me the period when it was, and I said, it were your teeth. I was your patient. And there were some good things about our partnership. Like I said, first, he only missed 3 days in 35 years. But we were able to do things like we bought a boat. And usually when you have a boat, you always want to be out there on a nice day. But someone else wants to get on the boat also. So, we never had a problem because when he was on the boat, I was working. And when I was on the boat, he was working. So we turned a negative into a positive. Then he said to me, he said, I got another way to turn a negative into a positive. I said, what's that? He said, why don't we just have one wife? I said, no, that's not going to work out. Well, then we decided we bought another store in Mamaroneck Rye, which is also in Westchester County, a very affluent area on Long Island Sound. Everybody had an 80-foot yacht, you know, outside their house, and we had one customer who came in, a woman, and she really had a beautiful home, maybe $10 million, but she had one problem. She was a kleptomaniac. And what she would do is she would steal everything she saw. And we had on the counters, the cosmetic companies would make these displays and the loads of lipsticks and perfume, and she was robbing us blind. So I said, we gotta come to some accommodation. So I called her husband, and he said, I understand the problem. She's having this with every business. She said, but we can come to some sort of understanding. I said, what are you talking about? He said, why don't you, every time she comes in, whatever she takes, mark it down, just send me the bill. Whatever it is, I'll pay. But this turned out to be another good thing, because when she came in, before we used to worry about what she's stealing. Now we're encouraging her. You know, buy this, buy that, you know. We got a phone call one day from the Israeli Tourist Bureau, and they said, congratulations, you are the 18th million visitor to the state of Israel, and you're getting a free trip. So what I did is I promptly hung up the phone, because I thought it was a friend of mine, you know, making a joke. Well, then they called me from the Israeli embassy. They said, it's really, you are selected. We'd like you to come down to the Empire State Building, and we'll go over the protocol and everything. I said, well, how much luggage can I bring? They said, well, if you want to bring 20 pieces of luggage, that's okay. So we got onto the plane, and it was a 747, and we were upstairs. And the first thing they come is, we have some famous wine from northern Israel, very expensive wine. They took our coats. And then the pilot said, Mr. and Mrs. Schriger, he said, I'd like to meet you. Can you please come up to the cockpit? Well, I'm sitting next to this other guy, and he said, who are you? I can't talk about it. I was told not to talk about it. Well, we land in Tel Aviv, and the plane goes onto the tarmac. It doesn't go into where the new planes usually stop, you know, right at the terminal. And the pilot gets on, and he said, will everybody please stay in their seats, because we have a couple on board, and they'll be disembarking from the plane. And they open the door, and we go into a limousine, Mercedes limousine, and they said, we'll be taking off, and we're going to the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. You have a 10-room suite in the penthouse. Well, we're waiting outside the hotel, and we're waiting 10, 15 minutes, and I said, what's going on here? They said, we have to roll out a red carpet from the hotel, you know, to the car, because we don't want you to walk on the sidewalk. And then we made TV appearances, and when we would go to each city to make an appearance, we didn't have a guide. The mayor of the city, he was our guide. And this was in the late 80s, and we were going to Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is maybe about 10 kilometers south of Jerusalem, and it's Israel, it's Arab occupied, Muslim occupied, and I see on the road hundreds of boulders, rocks, being thrown at cars that pass by that have Israeli license plates. The Israeli license plates were blue, the Arab were green, and they would throw it. And I said to the driver, could you stop a second? And he said, I don't think it's a good idea that, is that 5 to 6 already? Wow. You know, it's a good idea to stop. I said, just stop for 1 second. I said, are you armed? He said, yes. I went and I picked up one of the rocks, and he said, why'd you do that? I said, because that's one less rock that they can throw at us. And he said, thank you for doing that. Let me see. We had a reunion after 25 years of the 100 people who graduated pharmacy school. And it was in New York. And I said to my partner, I said, will you go? And he said, I don't want to go. He said, you let me know what it's like. Well, I got there to the reunion, and there weren't 100 people there. Only 10 showed up. But I wasn't going to tell him that. The next morning, he called me at the store. How was it? I described every one of the 100 students, who were with. And, this one, that one. I'm sorry I missed that. But that's the way it was. And finally got time. We were selling the store because there was a CVS on one block, and on the other side was another CVS, and I could see customers were forced to being told, go there, don't go. And the people said, I'd like to come to you anymore, but I'm not getting reimbursed, I have to go. I said, I got the same problem myself. So I said to my partner, look, I've been following the stock market, and there's one particular stock that's, I think, will really make a lot of money. Why don't we take all the money that we get for the merchandise that we sold and invest it? And he said, I'm moving to West Palm, Florida. He said, at our age, you can't afford to make a mistake like you can when you're 20 or 30, where you can make up for a mistake. He said, you gotta be very careful. I said, well, you do what you want. And he went down to West Palm. I said, but I am buying that stock. And I bought thousands of shares of the stock. And the stock went from 22 to 300. And I think the profit was $5 or $6 million. And here's this poor guy, my partner. He's down in West Palm working in a drugstore to make a living. But what I never told him is that I sold the stock at 24. So I only made 2 points. But I'm not going to tell him. Finally, he came to visit me 10 years later because he wanted to see where I was living. He thought I'm living, in a mansion somewhere. And I said, there's a couple things, Leon, I wanted to tell you. And first thing I told him about the meeting of all 100 students, which was like to be at 10 at the reunion. Then I told him about the stock. He was so happy to hear that noise. When we got to Hilton Head, Judy said, go to work, you're licensed there. I said, well, I retired to play golf. She said, well, you should go. And Hilton Head Hospital was a voluntary hospital at the time. So they were advertising for a pharmacist, and I went and I applied, and he said, you've done so pretty well here, you've got all that experience. He said, we can pay you, I think he was starting $110,000 to start, which was good from what pharmacists were making in the New York area. So he said, what salary are you demanding? And I said, I would like to work for free. I said, and I'll give you 40 hours a week. I said, but there's one thing, in retail pharmacy, we never got the opportunity to have IV solutions, chemo drugs, things that you don't do in a retail pharmacy that you do in a hospital or a lab setting. I said, if you give me an hour a week for a month, I'll continue to work. And they loved it. And I did it for 5 weeks, and he didn't give me 10 minutes of his time. So the 6th week, I didn't show up. And when he didn't show up, he called me. I said, you had the greatest deal that I ever offered anybody. And I see him every couple of years. He's not chief pharmacist here at the hospital, but he works in Savannah at one of the hospitals. And he says, in life, you make stupid mistakes. That was one of the biggest mistakes that I ever made. Well, so just got one more thing. When we got here, I said to Judy, I said, what can we do, what can I do that I haven't done in the 80 years that I've been here? Yeah. And she said, what I think you should do is you should go to a psychologist and and talk to a psychologist and, just see how things are going. Spend a couple of hours. So I did. I went to a psychologist and I think it was there 3 hours. We talked, and I said to the psychologist, I said, how long and how many sessions did you take you know, to be in a position where you're satisfied. And she said to me, I think you're okay just the way you are. So I went home and I was smiling, and Judy said, well, how did it work out? I said, well, it worked out. The woman told me that I'm fine. You know, I don't have to do anything. And my wife came out with the remark, well, I suggest you go to another psychiatrist. It's 6 o'clock. We got it just in time. Thanks for coming.